Eric Michaels didn't like the dressmaker's dummy as soon as he laid eyes on it. Then again, he was already prepared to hate anything his wife Sarah brought back from the Vandraven house. If ever there was a haunted house, a truly haunted house, then the Vandraven house was it. The site of both multiple murder and suicide, it sat overlooking the village like some broken idol for nearly 300 years. The place was cursed, damned, and Eric Michaels wanted nothing to do with it, and he sure as hell didn't want anything from that decrepit wreck in his home. But when Sarah had heard there was to be an auction there, she had promptly lost her mind and immediately called up her friend Marcia, arranging to meet at the Vandraven estate promptly at 8 the following morning. Eric could well imagine them both sat outside the front gate like a couple of vultures, decked out in their best summer dresses, just waiting for the poor auctioneer to open the doors so they could sweep in and pick over the fallen carcass of the Vandraven house. In the end, she had returned with only 2 purchases: a dressmaker's dummy and a dusty set of crystal-cut wine glasses that Eric told her he would never drink from. She had laughed at him then, calling him a superstitious fool before patting him fondly on the chest and returning to the meticulous cleaning of the newfound treasures. Eric sighed and left her to it. It was all very well for her to call him a fool, but she was an out-of-towner from up-country, as the locals were fond of saying. Eric had been born and bred in Mevagissey. He had heard the stories passed on from generation to generation, had gathered in tents on many a Halloween night and listened with terrified fascination as his friends and sometimes their older brothers told gruesome stories of Lucas Vandraven, who had slaughtered his wife, unborn child, and even his few servants before throwing himself from a nearby cliff. Stories of the Jonas family found dead in the basement of that house, their bodies twisted as if by some terrible force. She had never scurried past the house as a child, walking home along from school as the sunset made the cracked and shattered windows burn with a seemingly evil intent. Yes, the Vandraven house was as much a part of the village as the fishing boats in the harbour, and the summer people who came to visit every year. One day, he supposed, when the old place became decrepit enough, they would pull it down, and then all the evil things inside would rest. But for now, it still stood a monument to madness, a madness that had now spread to his home. The first real argument started when Sarah moved the dressmaker's dummy into their bedroom. Eric had seen the god-awful thing stood in the corner of the large bay window next to Sarah's sewing machine, and he had flipped out. There was no way he was getting even 1 minute's sleep with that ugly-looking thing looming over him, but Sarah was having none of it. The whole thing devolved into a shouting match where Eric threatened to sleep on the sofa till the damn thing was gone, with Sarah storming out, telling him he was welcome to it. She had left him there, sat on the bed, fuming, wanting to scoop the fucking thing up and throw it down the stairs after her, but not quite daring to do so. Instead, he stood up and slowly crossed the room, wondering what the hell she saw in something so ugly. The dummy was typical of its kind, legless, armless. It was nothing more than a headless torso impaled on a tarnished brass stand. The material covering the body looked to Eric like a light hessian, torn and ripped in many places. The overall feel of the thing was one of age and neglect. Curious now, he slid off the bed down to his knees and peered underneath, looking for a date or even a maker's mark. What he saw there caused him to recoil in horror. The underside of the thing was covered in a dark maroon stain that could only be blood, old and dry, but blood nevertheless. The bottom was covered in it, drenched in it. Reaching out with a trembling hand, he touched the stains and was suddenly falling, the room spinning, disappearing as if he were being pulled back down some dark tunnel. The room was gone, replaced by something else, somewhere else. All about him burnt candles, hundreds of candles, and blood. There was blood everywhere. It lay in puddles upon the hardwood floor, ran in rivulets down the walls. Even the ceiling dripped with a crimson rain, splashing and hissing where it made contact with the flickering candles, filling the air with a choking scent. Reaching down with a hand that was no longer his own, he pulled 2 wooden knitting needles from the abomination that lay dead at his feet and span around. A woman was climbing to her feet, quite naked and covered in blood. "The master," she sobbed. "Oh, Lucas, what have you done to our son?" Again, that terrible hand reached out, grabbing the woman by the hair and thrusting the needles into the soft flesh beneath her throat. She staggered away, gurgling blood gushing from her mouth as she tugged at the needle buried deep in her throat. Slipping, she cried out, grabbing at a nearby dressmaker's dummy, clinging on for dear life, pulling it, raking it with her nails as she pulled it down on top of her, pinning her beneath. She reached out, begging, pleading, but he was going away, back into the blackness, back to before, to now, to here, to this place. With a cry, he opened his eyes and yelled out in disgust. He was holding the dressmaker's dummy, holding it tight to his chest, like some terrible dance partner. Thrusting it away, he backed up, trying to look everywhere at once. Dizzy, disorientated, he tripped over the corner of the bedroom rug, crashing to the floor, his head hitting the radiator with terrible force. The pain was blinding, turning his vision red, and then mercifully he passed out into the blackness. He awoke 2 days later with 14 stitches and a bad concussion. Sarah had found him unconscious on the bedroom floor, his head lying in a pool of his own blood, and had immediately called for an ambulance. He had only awoken once in the back of the ambulance as it rushed towards St. Austell General, but his words had been slurred and nonsensical. Something about candles and blood, and then he passed out again. But now he was awake and doing quite well. His doctor had told him he would be able to go home at the end of the week after a few more days of observations. For the next few days he lay there, the tedium only broken by mealtimes and Sarah's frequent visits. At nights he would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he was going to do about the dressmaker's dummy. There was no way he could tell Sarah what had happened. She would think it hit his head a little too hard. Besides, she would never believe him. And who could blame her? He barely believed it himself. He knew only one thing. The damn thing had to go, but how to get rid of it? That was the true question. He was still pondering that same question on the night they released him from hospital. It was 7:30 that night, and Eric was standing outside the hospital entrance, doing his best not to obstruct the automatic sliding doors that kept opening and closing, much to the annoyance of the on-call duty nurse at reception, as she tried to take shelter from the pouring rain. Sarah should have been here to pick him up over half an hour ago, but she hadn't shown up. Worried, Michael rang the house, but the phone was engaged. He tried 2 more times with the same result, before trying her mobile, which rang for a couple of minutes and then just cut to her answering machine. Eric had a sudden sense of foreboding, one so strong that he actually became lightheaded and nearly dropped his phone as he leaned heavily against the side of the building. After a few deep breaths, he quickly dialed the number of the good friend and neighbour, Helen Daniels. Thankfully, she answered on the second ring and was more than happy to go and knock on the door and see what Sarah was up to. No, Michael didn't mind waiting. Michael stood there, sweating and listening to the silence for what seemed like forever. But in less than 5 minutes, Helen was back, telling him yes, the car was still there, and no one was answering the door, and yes, it was locked and the lights were on. Eric hung up on Helen before she could start asking questions and called for a taxi. Less than 10 minutes later, he was speeding towards home. Stepping out into the rain-soaked street, he paid the taxi driver and turned to face the house. Just like Helen had said, the car was still in the drive and the house was lit up like a Christmas tree with both the upstairs and the downstairs lights switched on. Feeling a little more relieved, Eric tried the front door and, finding it locked just like Helen had said, dug into his pocket and pulled out his keys. Stepping into the porch, he opened the door into the hall and suddenly he stopped. His wife's name dying on his lips. The hall phone was hanging by its cord gently, swinging back and forth. Sarah's handbag was lying on the floor, its contents scattered and strewn about. Jesus, God, the stairs were covered in blood. It was splattered all over, down the banister, slowly running down the hall in rivulets, soaking into the carpet beneath. Hitching, hardly able to breathe, Michael staggered back into the porch and vomited noisily into the corner. He stayed that way, holding onto the wall, sweating and shivering until his stomach stopped its twisting and heaving for only a moment. He considered just leaving. No one could lose that much blood and survive, but if there was a chance, even a small one. He tried not to think as he ascended the stairs, feeling the blood squelching under his feet. On the landing was one of Sarah's shoes. It lay on its side and was filled with blood. Eric's nerve broke then, and he turned to run, grabbing onto the sticky banister to stop him from falling headlong down the stairs. He was only halfway down when he suddenly stopped, reeling backwards. There was a woman at the bottom of the stairs. She was naked and covered in blood, a gaping hole in her throat. Michael screamed as he recognized the woman from his terrible vision. He tried to move, to run away, but he was frozen, unable to move an inch. The woman stared up the stairs, her eyes glittering like black jewels. Michael looked on in horror as she smiled up at him, revealing rotting teeth from which dark blood began to ooze. Letting out a cry of terror, his paralysis broke and he turned, fleeing up the stairs, passing the bedroom door, meaning to lock himself in the bathroom, but suddenly she appeared right in front of him. "Our son!" she screamed, splattering his face with noxious blood. Terrified, half blinded, he scrambled backwards, trying to wipe the vileness from his face. Screaming, she lunged forward, shoving him hard in the chest, sending him crashing through the bedroom door and onto the floor. His already battered head glanced off the bedroom table, and for a moment the world darkened, and he feared he would pass out. Groaning, he raised himself up onto his elbows, trying to look everywhere at once, but the doorway was empty. Sobbing with relief, he clambered to his feet, ignoring the throbbing in his head. Suddenly, he was sure she was behind him, ready to wrap her cold, dead hands around his throat, and with a cry he span around, his hands held high in warding off gestures, but the woman was not there. Only his wife, Sarah. For a moment, Eric Michaels was not sure what he was seeing. Then he began to laugh. The laughter turned into screams. The scream a shriek as he clawed at his face, at his eyes, desperate not to see, yet unable to look away. The dressmaker's dummy stood in its usual place, but now a bloody, crumpled figure lay at its base. Bone and sinew gleamed wetly under the merciless glare of the overhead light. The torn and battered body would have been unrecognizable except for Sarah's head, where it now sat atop the shoulders of the dressmaker's dummy. Her eyes were rolled back to white, her blood-covered mouth wrenched open in a silent, endless scream. The blood from the ragged stump of her neck ran down onto what was left of her tattered skin, which had been stitched and sewn with crude stitches onto the dressmaker's dummy. As he looked on with horror, the whole thing began to vibrate, the empty arms starting to twist and turn, reaching out towards him. Still screaming, he started to back away. He heard laughter. Then, not with his ears, but echoing around the broken vaults of his mind, and suddenly he realized Sarah's poor, dead lips were writhing, showing her bloody teeth. Her eyes now watched him, glaring at him as the vibrations grew stronger, closer and closer. The police found him there, hours later, after an anonymous call, raving and ranting, his mind broken as he cradled the head of his poor, murdered wife in his arms. And as for the dressmaker's dummy, there was no sign. In the Vandraven house, time did not stand still. It crawled and undulated. In the library, ancient books tumbled from wooden shelves. In the hall, the sound of booted heels scrabbled on the winding staircase. In the kitchen, an ear-piercing scream was followed by breaking glass, and then stillness. In this silence, a grandfather clock ticked, and the house waited and waited and waited.